good to see familiar faces. I believe at this point all of the LPC members are seated. Looks to be not the case. We're going to dim the lights as we start the presentation, just so that the screen will be a little bit more visible to most people. Honorable Saladino, were you interested in starting with some opening remarks?
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for coming out today and for helping us along with this very important process. And I am going to ask someone who is near and dear to everyone in the town of Oyster Bay, and certainly everyone in, don't sit down, everyone in Hicksville. I'm going to ask our dear friend, our leader, our county legislator, Rose Walker, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Would everyone please rise?
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
God bless America.
God bless America. Thank you, Rose. Let's give Rose Walker a hand. So this is our 6th LPC meeting, and we have been at it since the first meeting on October 31st. Quite frankly, our team, all of the interested parties have been at it for quite some time before that. Some of the members who are on the committee and others in the room have been working on this for a number of years. They've given their blood, sweat, and tears, their free time, and their hearts to making this dream come true. So I want to start off by showing our appreciation to all of you who have been focused on this project for so many years. We've been holding the meetings since the 6th, and we are making some real, building some real momentum on this. We have conversations with the Governor Cuomo and his team, who are very happy with the progress that we're making. But Governor Cuomo also mentioned the way in which we're doing it. We have people from all walks of life, clearly so many from the Hicksville community playing such an important role. People who serve us in a variety of capacities, from the president to the school board to every walk of life in Hicksville. We have the voice of experience here in Dave Capel, who for a young man really has a lot of years in government administration, as a mayor, as someone who has gone through the whole process in his village. We have the people looking after us, representing the interests of the business community, representing the interest of keeping us safe in the fire department, the interests of people who are more life experienced, that's a polite way to say needs a belt more than he needs a comb, and people like Ryan Coyne, you like that? People like Ryan Coyne, who represents the next generation, those who, quite frankly, will benefit for a whole lifetime of what each and every one of you are doing. And then finally, far from least, is all of you. Concerned people acting responsibly, professionally, to see this gets done. So the latest portion has been going on since October 6th, and we are coming to that point that gets very exciting, to prepare the final proposal for the state, and that has to get done now as we approach that deadline of March 30th. I see my colleagues in the Oyster Bay Town Board here. 2 of them aren't here, but have been working on this project before I even began on the town board, and that's Councilman Tony Macagnone and Councilwoman Rebecca Alessia. But before you sit down, I'd like to point out another colleague on the town board who's really pushing to make this happen, and that's Lou Imbrodo. Let's hear it for Lou. Fine, Councilman. So, your community, your project, and your future, our future together. And I'll finish off by saying how proud I am to work with so many highly qualified people, so many caring people in getting this done. When I got here, it was all about, oh, you'll never get it done, the people fight, the community wants too many things, doesn't want this, doesn't want that. it'll drag on, and that's not what happened. You have proven that this works. And the governor of the state of New York, the largest, the best state in all of America, is looking at us smiling to say that the way you've done this is the template for the rest of the state. I'm proud of you, and you should be exceptionally proud of yourselves and all you've done. So I want to thank all of our partners, and now it is the race to the end of the beginning. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. So tonight, this is a work session for the local planning committee. So I'm pleased that we have a good quorum, a good showing of our participants here. Earlier in the week, we had sent the version, a digital version of this draft for the members to look at. I provided for you now a hard copy so that as I go along to review the elements and highlight certain features of the report so that we get your real-time comments. I would suggest that if you have specific comments that you would like to write down, you could use these hard copies to do so and hand them in to me at the end of the session or later on. We are looking to have the LPC comments back on this draft report by Monday, or early morning on Tuesday would be very helpful next week, because we are looking to wrap this thing up and deliver it into the state by March 30th, as Dave Ashton, or as Joe had mentioned. So to start, the other thing I'll mention is that we have provided for each of the LPC members a document, which is basically a roster of the slate of projects that are being considered here for DRR funding, in addition to the projects that we would like to seek other sources of funding for. And every LPC member should place their name on it and then sign the document if they wish to endorse the entire slate as is, or if there are specific projects that you feel you need to recuse yourself from, there's a spot there for you to do so. So we'll get back to that later, but we're looking to collect all of those documents at the end of this session. So let me go back to... Sometimes you do need two hands. For whatever reason, right now, it is frozen. Okay. All right. So the document basically is organized in 5 sections. The first section is looking at the downtown profile and assessment. In essence, trying to describe what the existing conditions are, what the challenges we have perceived to be, and what things we would like to address moving forward in terms of specific projects. Then there's a section that talks to the general conditions of the marketplace. Then we move into a section that describes the vision and goals, things that this committee had worked towards in the early process here. So it is documented within this entire report. The next section deals with the management structure and methodology that we believe is appropriate to realize the projects that are being recommended here. And then ultimately getting into the specifics of the projects that are being recommended. There are 7 projects that we're talking about for the LPC members to recommend to the state for funding. Those projects are principally the ones that we've discussed at the last public workshop, talking about the public infrastructure that we would like to invest in so that private sector investment would be encouraged to go along certain commercial corridors. But to get there, we had to understand what we thought were the key assets of this downtown region. So the downtown profile and assessment starts to talk about where this downtown is located in the region and the assets that it has to connect to. And the major asset of Hicksville, as everybody has commented, is the proximity to the state highway system, but most importantly, the proximity of the downtown to the LIR station stop. It's one of the very few downtowns in the entire line along LIR that is within 1,000 feet of the train station. In our study of different conditions along the line, we've discovered that most of the train stops are at least a good 2,000 feet distant from the main street. And that poses a little bit of a challenge for those other downtowns to leverage the train station for future development. Here at Hicksville, you have the downtown right at hand. And so some of the conditions we were looking at, since the traditional downtown along Broadway seems to not be as vibrant as it once was, in part due to the widening of the street in 1967, so that there were more cars available to go down that route. In doing so, at that time, there was a demolition on the west side of Broadway of several of the shops, which clearly altered the general character of downtown. So in our search to find ways in which to recapture that sense of scale, the dynamism that had occurred when those local merchants were occupying those stores, we were looking at places where in the streets grid system, what would be the right rationale to try to replicate that? So some of the things that we were looking at, and I guess at this point you guys have seen this sort of general angel pattern which describes the DR area. It was described at pretty much about 162 acres. About 50 of those acres are in the immediate vicinity of the LIR station. The red dot that you see there is the station itself. So the other aspect of what has happened with downtown that changed its character was the actual elevation of the train line in 1963. Prior to that, everything was at grade, and so when you had crossings, particularly north and south, you often had collisions that sometimes led to fatalities. And there was a great interest in the early part of the century to actually elevate it. And those efforts finally resulted in '63 in the train track being elevated. In so doing, what happened was the bermed areas that supported the elevated train tracks prohibited easy circulation north and south. So there is an area in this downtown region that spans from Newbridge all the way just past Broadway that is elevated, so cars and trucks could actually pass through. But the train tracks itself still presents a bit of a barrier for the kind of sort of fluidity of circulation that we were interested in seeing occur. Because one of the things that happened to Broadway when it was a two-lane street was you had a lot of cross-street pedestrian traffic that helped the shoppers patronize various different stores. With the width of Broadway as it is now, as well as the speed of traffic that goes through, it's become much more difficult for that cross-street traffic to occur to help the businesses. The train track does the very same thing. Even though it's elevated, there is not the same level of encouragement to connect shopping districts or stores north and south of the train line. So one of the things that we were interested in addressing is how to make those things better so that more people would be interested in spending time in and around the traditional downtown, but also are there places that we could find where we could sort of spin off other commercial corridors. So one of the things we were looking at was how we could use where land seems to be most available. Now right now everybody's very aware that around the train station itself there's a lot of parking, surface parking lots. Most of those parking lots are dedicated for the commuters who go through the station. And visually, it doesn't necessarily make an appealing place, having a lot of stationary cars. And particularly at night when those cars leave, it's just very empty. It's very much in the antithesis, we'll say, of a vibrant downtown. So one of the things we were looking at was how to take that as a current asset, but also a liability, into something that is going to be much more of an asset. So one of the things that we also realized is there's been a lot of studying going on about this issue. And that studying did not just happen when we came on board. It has been undertaken for quite some time by all of you who are on the LPC member committee, but also many of the people in the citizenry who've been thinking about this problem and living with this problem for quite some time. So much of what we were doing was trying to steep ourselves and study what had happened before so that we were not starting from a zero stop, but we're actually getting out of the blocks very quickly. And having read the studies for the various different planning groups, particularly the vision for the Hamlet of Hicksville, looking at the BOA studies, looking for the study that was supported by the Long Island Sustainable Committee, we understood that there were several themes that were continually popping up. One of those themes had to do with making the crossings safer, making the town more vibrant with activity, and also making the place one where residents truly wanted to come back to and shop in. That there shouldn't be such a strong emphasis on doing things that on the face of it seems to only be supporting the needs of commuters. And not that residents aren't commuters, but there's an overwhelming sense that commuters come from outside of Hicksville and really just use this one particular aspect of downtown, get in, get out. And so one of the ideas driving our work was the expressions that we've heard from many different quarters that there's a lot of foot traffic available coming through the station. The numbers are very high, the highest in all of the entire LIR line, upwards of about 3 million people a year. So how is it that those potential patrons are not being used to help support the businesses that are already here and that we're hoping to entice to come here? So much of what our assessment here was looking, and this is sort of a series of film strip clips, as you will, to give a flavor of what we saw to be some of the potential points of conflict and difficulty. Certainly the train line in its elevation poses some issues. People's perceived safety as they walk through. It's a little bit difficult to navigate to see down the line long enough to see exactly what dangers might lurk behind the columns or as the turn happens. All of the crossings have separate issues. Some of the crossings where people want to go, they are not signaled appropriately or not striped appropriately. So people are actually forging their own way across. We'd like to change that so that there's a greater level of safety all across the board. There's also a sense from what we've gathered that the buildings that exist here are pretty isolated from one another, that they don't really relate to one another across some distance. And one of the things that we have recognized in all the work that we've been doing, not only in the New York State region, but in other parts of this country, is that downtowns that have a variety of building types, but also have a density usually thrive better because they are cohesive. They tie things together, and they build a certain kind of identity. And that's one of the things that, in our opinion, is very clearly lacking for the area around the train station right now. And so part of what this section in here, the downtown profile, is talking to those points. There are points of beauty about Hicksville in the downtown. Some may say that it's probably a little too thinly stretched if I claim that the JFK Memorial Park is one of those points of potential beauty. I personally like the gazebo that's there. I do think that there is a shockingly small amount of public open space in this downtown. There's only less than an acre, and that's the JFK Park. You do have, I believe, some ability to expand that, and by doing so, create a interesting setting where people who are not necessarily going to spend money do feel invited and welcome to come to downtown and spend their time. You don't accommodate people who can just come to rest, to sit, to actually enjoy activities without having to actually go into a private property to spend some money. Then you're basically curtailing the amount of patrons that you can potentially have. We've, in our experience, found that when people can occupy space at their will, at some point they will spend money. And that's one of the driving aspects of this overall effort, is to look at the economic prosperity that the downtown could strive for and actually achieve so that the economy of Hicksville would be bolstered. So this is a series of diagrams that talk to, in plan form, what the downtown characteristics are. So the first one is black and white, and it shows buildings in black, and everything that's not a building, basically open space, in white. And in the first diagram, you can see just how much white space there is in the area immediately surrounding the train track. The land coverage in the downtown is as low as 13%. That is significantly lower. Most downtowns across the United States in the population size of Hicksville are about 20 to 30% land coverage. So there's room to grow here, there's room to put things in here that can accommodate future activities. The second, or the central picture, talks to stuff that could be put into that area that was white. So the pink stuff in the middle are areas that we think, just on a pure formal manner of an exercise, of where new buildings could potentially be put. And if we just think about it as one level of building covering all that space, you could potentially generate about 1 million square feet. If you go to 4 stories, which is what the town has been talking about, trying to maximize what they thought should be built here, and building height around the train station at basically 55 feet or approximately 4 stories, you can generate about 4 million square feet here. Not saying what kind of stuff could be there, but just testing the capacity of this area to support new development. The third one, particularly on this wall, you probably can't see it, but there is a green spot. That green spot is the JFK Park. It's 0.7 acres, tiny. And so one of the things that we found to be severely lacking here is the open space that would help people move through and connect to different aspects of the downtown. As I mentioned before, one of the things that we found to be very exciting about how Hicksville's downtown is that the walking distance from the station lobby is not long. That's an unusual aspect and something that I think as a special quality to Hicksville should be celebrated, should be supported, and eventually I think it would help make good environments for different kinds of businesses. Because you have a lot of foot traffic already going through, and you can direct that foot traffic to things along Broadway, you can direct that foot traffic to things along Jerusalem or things along Newbridge, and potentially we think you can direct that traffic to things along West Barclay Street. There aren't things there now, but we think that in the future, stuff could be there. So we kind of looked at the traffic patterns, and most of those traffic patterns were suggesting that the state goes up, the state highways carry a lot of the north-south traffic. Jerusalem doesn't carry a lot of north-south traffic, a little bit. But it's something that, in looking at where there are, quote-unquote, soft sites, places where if you were interested in making change, that change would not meet with great resistance because there isn't something strong that's tying it, anchoring it to that particular place. So Jerusalem started to look like one of those places where if you removed it from through North-South Street, it would not necessarily impact things so significantly. You could redirect traffic so that people would make decisions to make a turn to go north a little bit earlier. The other thing we were looking at is the ownership of the roads and who controls what. And very clearly, Broadway as well as Newbridge Road are state highways. So the New York State Department of Transportation controls what goes on there. And given what we know about the state's programs to provide safety, we thought they would be a good working partner moving forward to increase the level of safety that would enable pedestrian crossings to be made with more ease. In addition, we looked at where the roads were owned by the county and where the roads were owned by the town. And so most of the local roads are owned by the county with a few exceptions. So we were thinking about ways in which using those partnerships, we could start to leverage not only funding sources, but definitely contributions to making these things happen. So this would be one of the examples that I know we don't need to browbeat anybody here, but since this is a report that will go to people in the state who don't know Hicksville, we thought it very appropriate to show slides of the conditions of where we thought danger lurks, and this would be one of them. This is the crossing just underneath the railroad tracks across Broadway at Herzog. So one of the other aspects about this station stop, not only does the train line run through, but you do have a great collection of nice buses coming through to this area. So if you're looking at, in the future, being able to use a train station instead of your gas station, to quote the sign on the train tracks, there are a number of different ways for people to actually get to the downtown area. You can bike, you can walk, and you can take the bus. And all of that in the future, we believe will decrease the amount of cars coming through the area, which will in essence decrease the amount of air pollution that you end up having in the general vicinity. Now there is a notion, of course, for the third rail to actually increase ridership here. And I think for the next 5 to 7 years, you'll get an increase in the number of cars coming through here, but that should not be the goal. We believe that the goal here is to leverage the train station itself so that you may have heard the term a transit-oriented development. What that truly means in its essence that people are using mass transit to get to and from the things that they wish to do, as opposed to taking individual cars. And what that does in general is it helps the region become cleaner and healthier. In addition, it tends to put more money in people's pockets since they don't have to lay out monies to purchase and then maintain an individual car. So in the larger picture, there's a notion that moving towards a train station oriented development in the, we'll say, immediate vicinity of the train station would be an appropriate direction to move into. What that often means as well is, in order to bring the returns that developers will be looking at, there's a certain density and a certain mixture of uses that would be appropriate. So we were looking overall in what kinds of things exist within a half-mile radius of the train station. In this case, the half-mile radius is looked at as the distance that most people feel comfortable walking. It represents pretty much a 15-minute walk. So within the region of the train station, you're not capturing a lot of current residents. The resident population in that region is as little as 4,600. The population surges in the daytime with the commuters and business people to about 1,200, but 12,000, excuse me. But that's not necessarily something that I believe in Hicksville you necessarily want to continue to do. Because again, there is a great opportunity here because of the number of people going through the train station right now. And the LIR is certainly planning to increase the volume of ridership along its lines. It's fair to say that Hicksville will accommodate some of that increase in ridership. How does it accommodate it? It's something that we were hoping to look at in the ways that we are proposing Hicksville look at dealing with how people cross the street and what kinds of uses people might want to place in this region. By crossing the street, ultimately, we were, well, let me go back a little bit. So this section of the profile started to look at different land uses and what kinds of land uses might be supported by how people actually tend things or pay for tenants of things. So we were looking at things such as housing and housing demand, where there is supply and where there is not. So there does seem to be, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lack of housing in the immediate surrounds of the train station. So there's an opportunity there if you look at it that way. Certainly we've seen in a lot of other areas where there's a train station that there are a demand for people who choose not to have a car to live nearby them. Those people tend to be people who are young, who are, we'll say, young couples, or sometimes they are people who are retired and are choosing not to keep up a single-family home any longer, but are trying to simplify their lives. So there's a tier here in the marketplace that is underrepresented in Hicksville, and there may be a potential to put that kind of use in and around this train station. We also looked at the possibility of lodging or hospitality uses here, noting that in years past, in the 18th century, as an example, there was a hotel that accommodated people who were traveling along the LIR. Is there an opportunity for such a thing to happen now? Likely. Would it be something that would happen in the near term? Not likely. There's just not enough attendance in this vicinity, in the findings that we were looking at, that would suggest that hotels would make sense in this location right now. You don't have as many, as we like to call them, demand generators, or people who want to stay here on a repeat business level to make some sense of it. Westbury has folks that make sense. They've got a lot more offices who support the kind of comings and goings of visitors to that. We don't have the same level of office occupancy in the downtown region for Hicksville just yet. So more than likely, if a hotel operator is interested in coming to this region, they would think twice about it now, but they may not think twice about it in about 7 years when things are taking on a momentum where there's a greater critical mass of activities happening in this one place. We were also looking at the possibility of office use occurring here. In Nassau County in general, there's an increase in the number of jobs that are being created, and many of those jobs are not necessarily in the high wage level. They tended to be, according to the findings that we were looking at, in the lower wage level. So the economy seems to be moving strongly forward, but just not fast in the high wage level arena. So when you're looking at office space, you're trying to figure out how much space would be necessary to accommodate the kinds of businesses that want to grow. And I think in the general region, there's a desire for new office space. They're just not placing it here, not just yet. I think the incentives for people to, as office users, come here hasn't yet balanced out between people's desire to have the freedom of mobility that they currently have with their personal car and the kind of regulated mobility, I'll call it, that people have when they're using mass transit. But as folks, I think, who are accustomed to using mass transit move further outbound from New York City into this region, there is an opportunity to capture some of that here, if that is desired. So one of the things that we had done as part of this planning process back in October when we were assembling as the LPC committee is to talk about what the downtown goals and visions are. And so part of what we were looking at was a vision statement, and this is the vision statement that was created then. If I could read it to you now, I don't think we have any divisions about it, but it said, our vision is the creation of a vibrant downtown that returns to its main street character while improving opportunities for local businesses and incorporating new housing markets to create a model community with an emphasis on walkability, open space, places to congregate, and engaging commuters to view Hicksville as a destination, not merely as a transit hub. And I think we can all agree that that is a very solid goal and one that has driven the thinking behind this plan that you've seen in the model and what is described here in the report. So from that larger vision, there were certain kinds of tactical goals that we had talked through and agreed upon, so I won't go through that very specifically now, but part of what you see here in the report are precedents that we thought would help people envision how those goals have been achieved elsewhere and what kinds of lessons we could take from those kinds of precedents as we move forward in building out the designs for this place. So I'd like to now just jump to the implementation section 3 here. This part talks more to the strategy overall of using investment in public infrastructure, the public realm, if you will, the open space, as that tool to entice private sector investment in this region as well. Because as we mentioned earlier, there's a great lack of public open space currently. There's not a place for people who don't have specific business to be here to actually spend time here. So part of what we wanted to create was that opportunity. And in so doing, we also were figuring out ways in which to sort of decongest the center so that those conflicts that we were hearing about and actually seeing firsthand between commuters and cars starts to get unraveled and resolved. In addition, we were looking at the ways in which things could be phased over time, because this certainly is a bigger vision than very much the DRI program may have initially conceived. And so how does this assembled committee start to think through and begin to recommend specific projects that would be feasible to accomplish and would be a catalyst moving forward for the other ventures that the town would like to see happen. So this section just goes through where we thought various different projects might cost and fall out. So I'll get to a point in a moment. This is the overall vision of what we were planning, or seeing, I would say, is the better way to describe it, for how all of those themes that I just mentioned would come together, would tie together, and form a unified place. So in specific, we're looking at the train station as being a specific destination that is drawing people from the region. So in order to be able to get people to safely get in and out, as well as deal with the commuters, Cecil, could you help me out in getting the pointer to work? Thanks. Okay. So this is where the train station is. And we were suggesting that there would be an opportunity to create a new station entry drive that would begin to take some of the traffic from Newbridge and redirect it to this area, so that a lot of the drop-off that currently happens and bunches up may start to get reduced along Newbridge itself. The other notion was to create a station plaza, an open space that would begin to accommodate the great flow of commuters coming in and out. Because ultimately what we were hoping to do was make a connection from the station stop to what we were conceiving as a new commercial corridor on West Barclay Street. At the same time, we were believing that there's an opportunity to create east-west crossing here by taking the current parking area and transforming it into a public space. Much of this concept here is looking at expanding the public realm so that there's more space for people to pass through, and there will be more frontages along that public space as people are passing through that would enable, we believe, private investment to take advantage of that foot traffic by making this whole district much more appealing, that people are going to spend more time. We're believing, as we've seen in many other locations, that private sector folks would be interested in investing in these places there and in and around Nelson Herzog. So much of the efforts on our part were to try to describe how within that larger scale of things we could break it down into more discrete projects. And much of what we were in the report describing is where we felt some of the impacts would be for the various different aspects here. There's not a huge impact on the infrastructure. Most of the things that we're describing here as projects are public investment on the surface. They're not dealing with excess demand on the existing stormwater system or the lighting system. Where we are proposing that future new development would occur, it's not more than about 2 million square feet all total over time, which according to our findings is not going to put or overtax the infrastructure in this region. There is a notion of how to get there in terms of moving parking around. So we were looking at what parking lots that the town currently owns that need to be restriped and made more efficient to take up the slack of where we are relocating parking spots. So we were, in essence, looking at about 3 spots where, in this region, there would be a relocation of about 156 spots. And in this region, I'm sorry, I got my numbers wrong. This would be about 156 spots here, and this would be about 71 spots there, and about another 70 spots there. We can find places for their replacement within the existing parking lot structure. So the other section of this report deals with the public involvement. This is section 4, and it describes the various different public workshops that we held. Many of you have attended them. I believe some of them were great fun. The first one may not have been as much fun. That was where we had broken people into groups of about 15 or 20 people. We had about, in this very same room, 7 different topics, and people toured each topic as they were being led by one of the facilitators. It was an opportunity for we, as the consultants, to hear directly from the mouths of people who live here what their actual feelings were and thoughts about those specific issues. One of our takeaways was that, again, traffic congestion is one of the top topics on people's mind. Pedestrian safety followed shortly thereafter. Then there were notions of improvement of the physical character of the area, the notion of incorporating a signage program that would help and aid the existing businesses, the notion that there needs to be greater variety of businesses in the region. All that was taken into account as we were listening to what people were saying. The second workshop was much more of a game, which I thought was great fun myself. We had the opportunity to break people into groups of about 9 and work on a table where we had different conceptual elements of where we thought different kinds of projects might be. We actually used the device of applying dollar amounts. In this case, it was DIR dollars to each of these particular elements, and asked people to think about how they'd like to spend those dollars on any of the different elements within the plan as we were just conceiving. I heard a lot of laughter. I heard a lot of giggles during the entire occasion, so I think people came away feeling that it was an interesting exercise that brought them to understand some things that they hadn't necessarily thought about before, but more than that they came away, I think, with a better sense of what all the pieces are involved with and what kinds of decisions the LPC membership needs to face. Because again, the DRR program, it's helpful to many communities. It is capped at $10 million. Only $9.7 million of that is going to the capital improvement. The $300,000 is getting spread amongst us consultants. We have to earn a living a little bit. So the things that people were talking about, particularly at that point in time, occurred in October. This was our December meeting. That many people were realizing that the things top of mind then, such as a high line, an elevated walkway that would have been the first ways that people were thinking about alleviating the conflict between cars and people. Well, that might be more costly than they may be willing to spend money on. That investing in things along Broadway might be where they would see more dollars flowing. We were also at that point talking about, in general, looking at other streets that exist that could become commercial corridors, such as I was pointing out a little bit earlier, West Barclay Street being one of those places where we think could be transformed from the passageway that it is now just to get to parking lots into something that is going to be an active street on both sides with 4-story mixed-use development occurring. Or perhaps even on Nelson Avenue, which currently has surface parking on most of those lots that are adjacent to Nelson Avenue and Herzog, that it could also be where a new street could be enlivened so that those kinds of mixed-use buildings could be built along its way. And it was our belief that the connective tissue, if you will, between all those things is the public open space system, that it would allow people to connect to Broadway. Visually, the new street plantings that we were conceiving, the paving patterns that we were believing should be put into place, the kind of signage that would be put into place to describe this district as its own special entity would give people cues as they walk through of what things belong together, where things tie to one another, and can actually say, we work together. So this is where we were believing, as many people who were playing the game, as it were. It's a grand vision, but how does it get paid for, and how much do people really want to place value on one element versus another? So our takeaway at that point was that many people did believe that future development along West Barkley was where folks thought energy should be placed. So we took that and started to actually work on a series of proposed projects. So one of the things in section 5 we start to talk about are what those projects are. So the first project that we're speaking about is the new station plaza. That would be this one here. The second one, I'm sorry, this is the entry drive. This would be the station plaza. This would be Festival Plaza. And this would be the thing that we're describing as the underline. And all eventually connecting to the thing that might end up being an expanded JFK Park. So we believe, at least for DRR funding, that the Station Plaza, the Entry Drive, and the Festival Plaza bundled together as the first forays into public investment would be what the LPC has thought through for actual funding. And we can talk about what those things actually look like. The Station Plaza itself, we were believing that you take Wyckoff Street and then you can split it so that there is a circulation system that would allow drop-off on both sides, and an ability to get to the station stop right here. We were conceiving this as the first step that would help to decongest the center. There's a notion that we were proposing that the protective canopy that could be constructed would be a helpful thing in inclement weather to keep people and encourage people to use this new drop-off system.
Just a quick question.
Oh, sure.
I noticed, at least in the drawing, there's a point at which that canopy stops.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to point out that should that be a project, it should be a continuance so you can get all the way to the station.
Yes, yes. Well, and at one point we showed it, and you see in the model that it was at one point conceived as one big shed. Look, the thing. These are conceptual and illustrative drawings. So moving forward, when the project may get funded and you start to actually engage the consultant to actually design and engineer it, many of those decisions will be made then. But at the moment, this was the kind of inspiration to start to think about how to solve some of the problems and provide benefits to not only residents who might come through here, but the commuters who use it on a daily basis. Any other questions at the moment? Okay. So in conjunction with that, we were conceiving the Station Plaza. That would be the place that would accommodate the larger flow of commuters coming through. And right now it's a surface parking lot, so we were believing that by creating some green space here, it starts to alleviate the sense of compression, but also may actually help in storm water management in this particular area. And ultimately, we were believing that this new West Barkley Street, by connecting it via an open space system, would work well together to bring people who come from the station up to this region. And ultimately, we believe that the development along West Barkley Street would be mixed use, in the sense that we're talking about the frontages being ground level retail, with residential and or office above, and then backing that would be the structured parking to support all that. So if some of the parking is used for commuters that bring people up through to Barclay Street for their specific destination of retrieving their car, would give them more of an opportunity once they're in that new mixed-use development of Barclay Street to perhaps spend more time there, perhaps spend more money there. Those are the development in that region, I believe, will happen in 3 or 4 years' time out. But the investment in the West Barclay Street public street, I believe, needs to occur first with the participation of various different players, the developers who may be interested in investing here being one of the partners, the MTA being another partner here. So that could happen relatively quicker than the private sector development may happen. This is our illustrative drawing for what we think could happen on Festival Plaza. As I mentioned, we were taking some of the existing parking away here and designing a passageway that is wide, that is clear, that is well designed, that would encourage people to move east-west between Newbridge and Broadway. In addition, we are carrying that same design impulse underneath the train lines. The notion here is just to change the paving of the ground so that the designed element seems like it is of a unified treatment as the Festival Plaza. And then, in addition, to make the lighting system accommodate artful installation so that it's not just the harsh, stark lighting that is there now. And so making the pedestrian experience better, we're hopeful again that people, as they move east-west, will start to find that there is more to do here than not. What we're designing space in this region to also accommodate would be the kiosks and seasonal activities that could be accommodated here. The pop-up stores, the food trucks could actually be in that region. And some of the community activities that we've been told used to occur with greater frequency here now have a different venue to choose from. So this would be a description of the underline that I just mentioned. One of the more important aspects of what we think this will end up doing is that right now this space underneath the railroad track has two sides that have parked cars, moving cars, as well as bike racks. And there's not much of an inducement for residents to come and use this region. And so by planning the different kinds of activities that would go on here and believing that there is going to end up having more traffic going north-south, particularly as people are finding a newer destination in around the area along Nelson Avenue for new development, that there's going to be a greater ability to tie the two sides, north side and south side, of the railroad tracks together. So one of the projects that came forward as a result of the call for projects that was issued in December is one that we're calling 99 Hicksville Station Plaza, that's looking directly at the property south of the railroad track. And the proposal there is to build ground floor retail with about 200 apartments above that. This development is proposed by one of your residents, and we've been looking at it carefully to understand the time frame for build-out as well as the dollar amount that would be requested. So I haven't yet talked about specifically each of these projects and what their cost estimation has been or what the requested amount has been, but I'll do so now. Up until now, the projects that we were looking at were being priced in the vicinity of between $3 and $6 million. And the LPC in the last meeting was looking at the various different projects and figuring out which ones they wanted to put in place to make this recommendation to the DRR program. So, noting that we needed to assemble a set of projects, a slate of projects that exceeded the $9.7 million that would be made available, we came up with something that approximated about $15 million. You'll see on the sheet here that's before you about the slate what those specific dollar amounts would be. This is the first project that would be, if it is awarded, a private sector project. They're requesting just $1.5 million to be contributed to their overall costs. The way that the DRR program would deal with it is that once the project is done is when they would award the $1.5 million, if that is something that will end up being one of the projects that will be included as part of the overall DRR program. Oh, sure. Mm-hmm. 55 feet in total, and I believe that in this particular case, it's a conceptual drawing which was trying to give them and their architects a sense of how it might get established and what kind of pricing they would look at. I know that the developer is currently talking with the town about what the new zoning regulations may describe for different regions in the vicinity. So when that new zoning gets done, that exact height will be known and the developer will adhere to that height. So yes, it's depicted as 5 stories. I would dare say that those are not short stories, so that they stack up higher, but they're normal size heights. But I do recognize that for private sector development, they need to get more stuff on the site in order to be able to recoup their investment. So one of the discussions that will occur as the projects get better defined is what would be those limitations that the town wants to impose on the style and the kind of development in this particular region. The zoning code, which was being looked at last year in 2006, actually in 2017, was halted for a bit while this particular exercise was being undertaken so that the town would be better informed about how, for the future, they wanted to start characterizing the new buildings that would come thereafter. How high, how big it should sit on the site, what kinds of materials should be used there. All of that will end up being described in the zoning guidelines. So one of the other private projects that people were wanting to include as part of this DR thing is for the Trinity Lutheran Church Daycare Center. They put in a proposal to ask for $75,000, which would go to their cost to create a facility for infant daycare here. The location is at 97 West Nikolai, which is where they will start their program. It's a residential house that they're converting, so the funding is specifically for creating the appropriate spaces that will comply with New York State regulations for infant daycare. The notion is that the program will accommodate about 12 infants, and at some point when the program grows, they would relocate the facility to other properties that the Lutheran Church has on West Nikolai. I believe they're talking about 40 West Nikolai as being the other place that they may incorporate an expanded infant daycare center. Trinity Lutheran Church currently operates daycare centers for ages 3 and up. So this program just expands their capability of handling daycare for others. And in this town, there seems to be quite a number of young families that are choosing to come here, and yet they still need to work, so that they're needing a place that they can trust where they can have their kids be cared for while they're at work. And this would be one of them. 2 years? Okay. No, it's possible, Rose. Everybody gets adopted sometime. So one of the last projects that is on the roster for DR consideration for funding is a small business development fund, which we run by the town of Oyster Bay, and they're asking for $800,000 to be used as a grant for businesses who wish to upgrade their facades, or they're interested in coming to Hicksville but need some additional assistance in establishing themselves here. And so this fund would help not cover all the costs, but help cover some of the costs in doing so. One of the things that came out of many of the previous discussions and some of the conversations that I've held with people here has been that the town has a series of big and, we'll say, inappropriately designed signs that don't necessarily make the town look as pleasant as they would like to. So this program would help people in designing their signage and putting it in places to replace existing signage that would overall improve the way the place looks. So that's our slate of DRI projects for consideration. Do people have questions on the LPC committee about any of those? So I know you guys have seen a lot of this already. You've started to read through the report, and I got the sense that at this point in time that most of the people do believe in what these are. What I'll do now is go through a series of projects that are not being put forward as projects recommended for DRR funding, but things that are initiatives that the town would like to still continue on with, and if any of the projects in the first roster fall out of consideration, these would be, quote unquote, the backup plan. These tend to be a bit more pricey because they're larger and take perhaps a little bit more time than what the DRI funding program wanted to get started with. You might recall from previous conversations, the DRI funding is really focused on projects that could be started in this year, 2018, and completed within 2 years' time, by 2020 at the outside. And so many of these projects on this list are things that would likely be able to be started this year, but may not be able to be completed within that time frame, and definitely involve a great many players who would perhaps involve a lot more time before things can get started. So I'll just read through some of them. We were looking at engaging with New York State Department of Transportation to roll out a complete street program on both Broadway as well as Newbridge Road. Complete Streets is an existing program within the Department of Transportation that focuses on calming traffic and encouraging pedestrian safety by increasing the visibility around crosswalks, and some of that might include moving the curb out to a point where pedestrians are more visible to the drivers, to planting more street trees so that people have better protection during inclement weather, to also describing the way parking could be done on street in ways that break it up so there isn't just a singular line of parking. All that is working towards making it a more beautiful place, if you will. Since that program already exists, we were suggesting that the town work to petition the Department of Transportation to work with them and make Broadway and Newbridge a stronger priority than it is now. The other thing is with the West Broadway development that we were looking to encourage private sector people to work with the town of Oyster Bay so that it could be transformed, as I was talking about, into this new kind of vibrant commercial corridor. With that goes the parking garages that would support that. And then we were looking at expanding the JFK park so that it increases almost threefold from its current 0.7 acres to about 3 acres all told. This, in our vision, would work best if the park were allowed to go all the way down to Nelson and Herzog. And it would provide the usable space to host larger community activities. There was notions of people wanting to gather to hear music concerts or to hear different kinds of orations, to see small plays, even to start to bring back the flags that might occur along Broadway. There would be a place for people to start having those kinds of activities on a more continual basis than what it is possible right now. Part of what making the expanded JFK Park possible would be the vacation of Jerusalem Street from Herzog to West John Street, so that you have the clear and direct access of people crossing east-west, but also you're creating one side that is completely car-free, and therefore the ability for people to feel safe and getting to the park, we believe, would be increased. And lastly, we were talking about potential development along the Nelson Avenue Herzog area. Again, that would be in partnership with private developers. So if the initial investment is looking at the streetscape, improving the paving patterns that are there, and with the town new guidelines for design being adopted, I believe, by the middle part of the summer, then that would give, I think, developers a great sense of comfort about what they could and could not do. That level of predictability doesn't happen right now because we're still in the process of discussing things. But as the zoning does get formalized, I think we'll start to see much more momentum in the same ways that we've seen and have started to hold conversations with private sector developers who are now very much interested in West Barclay Street. Do you have questions or comments from the LPC? Nope. Okay. So that's pretty much how the report goes. It is a draft, so we are looking to receive the comments back from the LPC members by next Tuesday. If you have formal comments that you would like to write down, please do send them to me, either in writing or just call me on the telephone. I'd be happy to take them in that way. We'd like to make it as easy as possible for you to participate in how this refinement of the draft gets done. Because the goal here is the drop-dead deadline of March 30th to submit the document to the state. The state will then, and it will still be a draft, but the state will then review the document and will make a formal announcement about the awards of any of the DRI projects by summer. Hopefully in the early part of the summer, but by summer. So at that point, the report will be made available widely to the public. But at this point, it is for the purposes of the LPC members to consider. So again, if you would be able to give your comments to me, we will incorporate them in. And then the last thing for this evening is you do have a document in front of you which talks to the slate of projects that we have put together here. So if you could look at it, review it, sign it, and then return it to me before you leave, that would be terrific. If you have questions about the things that are on the project's listing, do let me know, but they're the very same things that we've just reviewed. Does everybody have a pen? Okay. And for those LPC members who could not be present tonight, there are only two, Jim McCaffrey and Colin Bell will be reaching out to them to get them to endorse those slates of projects as well. Okay. Well, this has been a delightful thing for me to help come forward with a vision which we think is going to have lasting value for Hicksville. It's not going to be an easy road to implement this thing, but we do think that the report outlines steps in which will encourage people to carry forward with the enthusiasm to actually make it happen. And transforming downtowns is never been a science. It's kind of an artful thing, and it takes fortitude, it takes passion. And from what I've seen on this panel, people here in Hicksville have that. So good luck to you all. Thank you.